On this channel, with the exception of the last video, we always speak in English. But for a while now, English hasn't been the #1 language in the world. Well, okay, maybe it is in terms of what people speak on a day-to-day, and it's certainly the biggest universal language. But in this video, I want to talk about native speakers and go through the top 10 most spoken languages of the world in that aspect. A quick disclaimer, these numbers are based on population, and that's something in constant change. So you might find a list that orders these somewhat differently, but I think as a top 10, it is solid. Starting with an honorable mention, which doesn't make the list, but I feel like it should. French. Originating in France and spread through the influence of the country throughout the world. It nowadays has 76 million native speakers, with 153 non-native, totaling at 229 million worldwide. It's the official language of 20 countries, with the highest number of speakers in France, Canada, Belgium, and then Switzerland. It's also widely spoken in parts of Western and Central Africa, on several Caribbean islands, and even on the South American continent, in French Guiana. French is a Romance language, but over the centuries, it's taken on influence from Celtic and Germanic tongues. In fact, the language and country are named after the Franks, a collection of tribes from the Middle Ages who used a Germanic language, Frankish. In return, French contributed a lot to the English language, even being the language spoken at the English court at some times in history. Now, actually starting the top 10. At number 10, Punjabi/Landa. This one has recently replaced German in the top 10, having over 100 million native speakers. It is spoken in large areas of India and Pakistan. Its origin is the Punjab region, which was separated into two when the British left the area. Punjabi is the most widely spoken language in Pakistan, the 11th most widely spoken language in India, and interestingly the 5th most spoken in Canada. It can be written in two alphabets, Samukhi or Gurmukhi. Usually the Muslim population uses the first and the Sikh population uses the latter. Following it at number 9, Japanese. Almost all 130 million native speakers live in the origin point of this language, Japan, and it's the most highly geographically concentrated language on the list. Japanese people use two writing systems, hiragana and katakana, and sometimes even use Chinese characters. The largest groups of speakers outside of Japan are in the US, Brazil, and the Philippines. At number 8, and I was surprised by this one, Russian. We all think of Russia as a gigantic country, but, and maybe this is just me, I get the idea that a lot of it is deserted. But still, its language is one of the dominant ones in the world. It has 267 million speakers, but only 153 million are native, with the remaining spread across the world, but being mostly focused in the neighboring countries, consequence of the historic expansions of the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. Ukrainian and Belarusian are somewhat similar to Russian, as they all originate from the medieval language of the Kievan Rus, an origin state for the three countries. Russian is also related to other Slavic languages, and it uses the Cyrillic alphabet. Next, at number 7, Portuguese. Opposite from French, Portuguese has most of its total speakers being native, 221 million, with only an additional 11 million non-native. A Latin language named after the place where it was developed, Portugal, but today it's spoken in 15 countries. Portugal and then countries that are in the regions of former Portuguese domains, ranging from Brazil to Angola, Mozambique, and a lot of small countries in Africa, to Asia, with Timor-Leste and the old China enclave of Macau. Portuguese is also a good example of how the same language can be spoken differently, which I guess must happen with most languages. Dialects and accents develop. Brazilian Portuguese is the most spoken in terms of numbers, and it is somewhat different to the European version, as is the case with African Portuguese, which can even differ between African countries themselves. Someone who speaks Portuguese is called a lusophone. This word comes from Lusitania, the name that the Roman Empire had for the area where Portugal is. For number 6, we move away from European languages. Bengali, with 228 million native speakers. Bengali is the language of Bangladesh, a country in Asia, also being spoken in a lot of Indian states, causing it to be the second most spoken language inside India. Bengali is an Indo-Aryan language, and funny enough, it has a slightly common origin with European languages. So technically, Bengali is like a fifth-degree cousin of French or English. They don't use the same alphabet though, using the Bengali script. Then we have Arabic, opening up the top 5. Arabic is spoken by approximately over 420 million people worldwide, with 319 million of those being native. The official language of 26 countries, most of which, if not all, are in North Africa and the Middle East. Although a few people argue that the regional dialects within Arab are so different that they should be considered different languages, in the same way that Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian are very similar, but also very different. But there is something that makes the case for a single language. What they did was create an academic uniform written form, modern standard Arabic. However, the spoken form is incredibly different. If you joined someone from Morocco and another from Oman, they would have some trouble understanding each other. This universal written form is closely related to the classical Arabic of old religious texts, and so Arabic is usually seen as the language of Islam. However, most Muslims are not native Arabic speakers. Next, Hindi at number 4. India has 23 official languages, but Hindi/Urdu is the biggest one. There's a big argument whether these are two different dialects or just one language, but for the sake of this list, we'll group them together. It is spoken by 341 million people as a native language. But we should point out that Hindi uses the Devanagari script, while Urdu uses Persian script. India also speaks a lot of English due to the presence of the British Empire in the region. But since their independence and the consolidation of their national customs, Hindu and Urdu are taking over as the main dialects of the country. At number 3, the language we all know and love, English. 380 million native speakers, but over 500 million consider it a second language, not to mention everyone who knows it a little bit. I understand the way that these lists are made, but I think that English needs a mention as the real most spoken language in the world. If you were to travel to any random country, the odds of people knowing at least basic English are much larger than them knowing the top 2 languages that are coming up on this list. This is because, and this might be changing, the world still consumes a lot of entertainment in English, whether it's music, movies, or TV shows made in the US, Canada, or the UK. There's a cultural dominance of English worldwide. It's the lingua franca of business, travel, and international relations. It's also easy to learn, especially when compared to its biggest rivals, Spanish and Chinese, beginning in the UK and spreading through the world by the hands of the British Empire. The name English comes from the Angles, a Germanic people who settled in Britain in the first millennium AD. It is a Germanic language, in some aspects close to Dutch and German, but like we saw, having some Romanic influence through French or even Latin itself. Still in Europe, Spanish gets the silver medal in this list. Spanish is spoken by over 460 million people in over 31 countries, already surpassing English in terms of native speakers. It's the main language of most of South America, except Brazil. pretty much all of Central America, Mexico, and it's making its way further into the US, especially in the southernmost states, where it already has over 40 million native speakers. This makes the US the second biggest Spanish-speaking country in the world, only behind its neighbor, Mexico. It originated in the Castile region of Spain, and for this reason it's sometimes referred to as Castilian. Starting in the European medieval state, it quickly spread throughout the world with the expansion of the Spanish Empire. A fun fact is that only one country in Africa has it as an official language, Equatorial Guinea, which has it along the official languages of Portuguese and French. And finally, the most spoken language in the world, Chinese. 1.2 billion native speakers, 1 in every 6 people in the world. Granted, they're almost all in China, but still. Chinese is sort of like a group of languages, Mandarin Chinese being the biggest and main one with 1 billion speakers. The native name for Mandarin is Putonghua, which literally means common speech. Although in Taiwan, people call it Guoyu, which is a national language. It's written in Chinese characters, which are an ancient pictorial system, where each symbol represents a different word or concept. There are 2 main versions: the traditional characters used in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Macau, and the simplified characters, which are used in China, Singapore, and Malaysia. Put together, these top 10 languages make up a large percentage of the world population, with Arabic and Hindi taking around 4% each, English 5%, Spanish 6%, and Chinese about 17%. All put together, the native speakers of these make up around 47% of the world population. If we take into account the total number of speakers and not just native, there aren't a lot of changes. English becomes number 1, and a few new languages make the list, French and Indonesian, as well as a few other changes in order. So that was a brief overlook at the top 10 most spoken languages in the world. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to leave a comment with what languages you speak. Subscribe to catch future videos and join our great conversations on the Discord server below. I will see you next time.